one of the most remarkable documents that the Georgia Historical Society has in its collection, and we have 4 million manuscripts in the collection, but the most important one, and certainly the most remarkable one that we have, is an original draft copy of the United States Constitution. It was the copy that belonged to Abraham Baldwin, who was one of the delegates from Georgia. He was later the founding president of the University of Georgia and a United States senator. This copy has his signature on it. And the delegates, what they did was they worked off of a printed draft, and they made handwritten changes to that draft. And then the printer printed a final draft copy, and the delegates were told to destroy the draft copies. They did everything in secrecy. The windows were all closed. They didn't want the world to know the process by which they had gotten to this final draft. So they were told to destroy the draft copies, and fortunately, at least a dozen of the delegates decided that this was such an important document, such an amazing piece of history, that it needed to be saved and preserved. So, and Baldwin was one of those people. So there are only about a dozen of these in existence in the world today, and they really give us a fascinating look at how the delegates came to the final draft, what their thinking was. You know, oftentimes what you take out is just as good of an indication as to what your thinking is as to what you left in. And so a lot of what's in the draft are actual changes where they have struck through and eliminated certain clauses and writing in it. For instance, let's take a look at, first of all, we can see Baldwin's, and I'll just lift this up here, we can see Baldwin's signature in the upper left-hand corner here. So we do know that this is the copy that belonged to him. And you can see on the very first page changes that were made. For instance, one of the things that they changed here was that originally they had that the vice president would be ex officio president of the Senate. That was struck out so that the vice president would in fact be the president of the Senate. It was a small but very important change that was made. On the back side of the document, what they did, and Baldwin was on the Committee for Style, so they were very much focused on how to make the wording read properly and in such a way that it could be understood. And so when you look at the back of the first page, you'll see little X's and crosses, and those correspond to places on the draft. Here we go. These two pages go together. They correspond with places on the draft itself where they've made changes. And one of the things I think is interesting here at the top of page 3, you can see that they have struck through this particular paragraph. This clause in here had said that no state without the consent of Congress could lay imports, enter into any trade with foreign nations. Also, they could not wage war without the consent of Congress. All that was taken out because obviously the idea that states would be able to function almost as independent nations would be contrary to the Constitution itself, much of that waiting for later interpretation, particularly by the Marshall Court in some years afterwards. But this is a really remarkable document. The Georgia Historical Society has had this for as long as anyone knows. We're not exactly sure how we got the document. Part of the problem is that in the 19th century, they simply just did not keep very good records. Today, if something comes in, there's a very elaborate process for tracking the document, acknowledging the donor, but in the 19th century, you were lucky maybe if today we have a letter even acknowledging that something came here. My guess is that this came to us well before the Civil War. Georgia Historical Society was founded in 1839. We began collecting in that year, also publishing Georgia history in that year. So the records going back 172 years ago are just not what they are today. So we're not really sure how we got it. There is a date stamped in the lower right-hand corner, 1849, and we're not sure why that is there. We suspect that that may have something to do with when it arrived here, and they at that time stamped it with the date of 1849. It did not come directly from Baldwin. Baldwin died before the society was founded, so it may have been a descendant of his that donated it to us. But we are very, very blessed and pleased to have this in the collection because, as I said, there are only about a dozen of them anywhere in the world. This is the only copy that I know that's in a Southern institution. And to have the copy, of course, that belonged to the Georgia delegate is very exciting for us. The way that it's conserved, the main thing that we do with it is that we don't really bring it out very often. It stays back in the archival stacks, which is an area that is very, very closely monitored in terms of the environmental controls. It stays at, along with the other documents back there, stays at a very constant temperature and humidity. Years ago, the way that they thought that you could preserve a document was by encapsulating it in rice paper. We would not do that today. This document has been encapsulated in rice paper, which is one of the reasons why it's okay for me certainly to pick it up. But today what we do is we use a process called Mylar, which is basically a plastic sleeve that you can place the document in. It is a reversible process, unlike the rice paper, which is an irreversible process. So you can put the document into the Mylar, you can seal the edges of it up, and the static will hold the document in place, and then anytime you want to take it out, you can simply clip the edges of the Mylar and remove the document from it. So it's a reversible process and provides the kind of proper protection and reversible protection that documents need to have. I think the Constitution and this particular copy is relevant and is important, first of all, as it functions in many ways as an artifact, because it was there at the Constitutional Convention. It's one of those documents that when we look at it, we can draw inspiration as citizens of the United States that this is the most important document, the sacred document. The Declaration of Independence, of course, also critically important, but the Constitution gave us the government that we have today. So this is the most sacred document in American history. So as an artifact in and of itself, to be able to hold that, to know that it was there, to have that sort of personal touch back to that historic event. I mean, to think about this is something that's come to us from the past, and we can hold this now, and it's that link that we have back to that event. And it, I think, is something that as Americans we can look at and draw inspiration, knowledge, and this sense of who we are from documents like this, and this document in particular.